Here to join us today for our monthly Prevention and Student Services webinar. That was the One Voice Children's Choir from Utah. Feel free to post in the chat if you have students or others that you know in that video. We love to hear that. And we love to start off by showcasing the amazing talents of Utah students. I'm Tanya Albornoz. I'm your DJ and host today. My day job is being the prevention coordinator and overseeing a phenomenal team of preventional specialists here at USBE. We welcome all the USBE Prevention and Student Services staff as well, including Chrisanne Lewis, who is the coordinator of the Student Services team. Wave and say hi, thank you, here at USBE. If you did not receive my email about today's webinar, I want to make sure to mention that the topic of today's webinar has changed. If you are here for this cybersecurity webinar, that webinar will be rescheduled for a later date to make sure we accurately reflect the legislative changes, which were quite a few, and updates from the recently concluded legislative session. Please keep an eye out for additional information regarding the new date and time for that webinar. And since we moved this topic from next month to today, next month's webinar will also change. April's webinar will focus on behavioral support basics. So join us on April 16th for what is sure to be some very useful information. Today's topic will focus on the requirements for schools from Utah Code and Rule regarding child sex abuse and human trafficking prevention. So if you're here for that, you're in the right place. Mindy Elliott, USBE Prevention Specialist, and special guest Deandra Brown will be presenting for us today. My thanks to both of you for being flexible. And as always, feel free, participants, to put questions and comments, and especially if they're witty comments, in the chat, and we will make sure to address all of those at the appropriate time. Now I will turn it over to you, Mindy.
Hello, my name is Mindy Elliott, and I am the Child Sexual Abuse and Human Trafficking Prevention Specialist for the Utah State Board of Education. And my former role was a counselor in schools, and I did work as an MTSS specialist at the district where I supported prevention efforts. And this topic is very near and dear to my heart, and hopefully I can provide some clarity on what is required and the processes that involved CSA and human trafficking. Let me share my screen. I almost forgot that part. Can everybody see my screen now?
Closed captions, are the closed captions on now? I'll keep working.
Okay, perfect. Can we see my screen? Okay. We will get started. Oh. Okay, our learning intentions for today, we hope that you walk away being able to identify the legal requirements for child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention instruction in Utah, understand the framework for partnership, including parental rights and age-appropriate content, and recognize the process for implementing child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention training in Utah schools. I get asked why we should teach child sexual abuse and human trafficking abuse prevention in schools fairly often, and hopefully that is something that we will be able to answer for you today. And to get me started, we have a very special guest, Deandra Brown. She is one of my new friends, and she is wonderful at helping explain the why behind child sexual abuse prevention in Utah schools. So I'm going to turn the time over to her and let her introduce herself.
Thank you, Mindy and Tanya and team. I feel like I've had the opportunity to cross paths and train with these wonderful prevention team members, and it's been a great opportunity to see all the incredible work that all of you are doing across the state of Utah. So as Mindy mentioned, my name is Deandra Brown. I am the Prevention and Policy Advocate at Prevent Child Abuse Utah. I specifically also help with any initiatives for the Utah Family Strengthening Network. So I get the opportunity to work with a lot of amazing partners who are invested in the work of prevention. But before we dive into specifics regarding prevention education, I just wanted to share briefly a little bit about myself and why this work matters to me so much personally. So I am a concert pianist by trade, and I did all my training at the Juilliard School in New York City. I perform with my siblings as part of our ensemble group, the Five Browns, and we've been performing in wonderful venues all around the world for over 20 years. So for most of my life, I assumed that music would be my life's passion, and I was incredibly blessed to be able to feel like I found that passion performing and teaching and sharing that part of my life with audiences around the world. I never expected that my life would include advocating for child abuse prevention. But I am here today not only as a prevention advocate, but I'm also here as a survivor of child sexual and physical abuse. So for many years, I was determined to never tell a soul about what happened to me as a child. Like many survivors, I shoved these experiences into a back closet in my mind and just shut the door tightly and vowed never to reopen it. But things changed as my siblings and I realized that other kids were at risk of being hurt by our father. So when my siblings and I eventually pursued a case against him and that news became public, something unexpected happened for me. Survivors began reaching out and emailing us from all over the world, most of them sharing something in common that they had never told anyone before, that they had been sexually abused. These were people in their 40s, 50s, and even 60s disclosing to strangers in us. So hearing their stories made something really clear to me. I could keep my life and healing private, which is a completely valid path for survivors, or I could share my experiences and perspective in hopes of helping others. So over 12 years later, I haven't looked back, and here I am. So music has and will always be my life's work, but I never imagined I'd add another passion to it, advocating for children and abuse prevention. This is what keeps me motivated every day. The work is heavy on some of those days, but having the opportunity to help others, in particular children, is such an honor that I will never take for granted. This unexpected path is what brings me here today to join with you. So one of the biggest reasons I believe prevention is important is because children often don't have those words to describe what is happening to them. And if Mendy, if you can move that slide ahead. Yep, thank you. Um, it's important for us to, most children don't understand, um, most of us don't understand that there are reasons why abuse is not typically committed by strangers. It's usually someone the child knows and trusts, which makes that situation even more traumatizing for the child, as you can imagine. Personally, I trusted and loved my father, so what was happening was so confusing as a child. I was certain that he knew what was best for me and would never do anything to hurt me. Many children feel in their gut that something is wrong, but they just don't have the words to understand and express what is happening. They may even assume they are the ones that have done something wrong, and they are the only ones this is happening to. That guilt and confusion can almost be too heavy to shoulder. So disclosure of abuse is often delayed, and sometimes for years and even decades. It often takes a long time to really work through and process what happened in your childhood and start to rebuild that trust and that confidence in other people, that you can share those moments with other people. Prevention education helps change that timeline. And this is one of the things that makes me so excited about trying to help the next generation. It allows children to receive help and relief much sooner than I did. When children learn early and in an age appropriate manner, lifelong realization becomes part of who they are. They discover it and they have it with them. They understand that their body belongs to them and that they can trust those instincts, that those uh-oh feelings, we call it sometimes, and that they can talk to trusted adults. So, in short, they gain that language, that important language. They gain clarity and they gain the permission they may need to speak up and let adults help shoulder that weight. So prevention education matters. It matters personally to many of us who have lived it, but it matters to so many community members and individuals across the state. I know that if I had received this training as a child, I would have disclosed the abuse much sooner and may have even had the ability to save my younger sister from having to suffer it too. Next slide, please. For the first few years after the case against my father went public, I was still unsure of the path ahead. How much would I share publicly with people? How much would I say to the press? Would people look at me differently? Would they think negatively? These are all things that were roaming around in my head and so many other survivors. In 2014, I received a cold call from a Utah legislator who was trying to pass a bill that would allow sexual abuse prevention to be taught to students, parents, and educators. Representative Angela Romero shared with me personally that the bill was all but dead, as legislators were failing to understand that sexual abuse is a problem in Utah and that this legislation was even needed. So Representative Romero asked if I'd be willing to join her and testify at a legislative committee hearing and sharing my personal experiences and how this bill could have helped me as a child. I was the little kid who was literally scared of my shadow for the first few years of my life. I would run inside screaming and crying because it was following me everywhere I went. So I say this because like confidence and the ability to speak out in front of people about such personal experiences is something I would have never imagined. It's basically the stuff that nightmares are made of for me. So I was scared and a little nervous, but I agreed to join her at the committee hearing, thinking that even if sharing my experiences could help one child, it would be so worth it. And the bill not only passed in that 2014 session, but something happened that has never occurred before or since. A few senators opened up their lives and disclosed their own childhood abuse on the Senate floor for all of their colleagues and all of the community. I'm not sure I've ever seen personally a more powerful moment at the Capitol, and I'm not sure I ever will again. This moment is something that has stuck with me for a long time. There are so many things that unite us that we just don't talk about. So having that support was incredible. But in order to pass the bill in 2014, there was no funding was attached because we knew that that would make the bill fail. It remained that way with no funding until 2024 when Senate Bill 205, otherwise known as the Safe Child Project, which many of you may be familiar with, added this important ongoing funding to support implementation and expand the reach of prevention education. So when the funding was granted a couple years ago by the legislature, it was one of the most amazing moments probably in my life. This full circle moment of coming to the legislature for the first time and speaking out, understanding the impact of this legislation that was passed originally, and now finally having much needed funding so that this prevention education can move forward across all areas of the state. Utah's approach centers on partnerships. Parents remain the most important influence in a child's life. From the beginning, it was always important to all of us involved that prevention education in schools support, not replace, those important conversations parents have with their children. These lessons are meant to reinforce those discussions already happening in the home or jumpstart those conversations. Parents are notified about what will be taught and are invited to join the classroom when the lesson is being delivered. That was an important part of the language of the original bill for all of us involved too. When children hear consistent age-appropriate messages about body safety, both at school and then reinforced at home, those messages become stronger and the children realize that they are not alone. So prevention works, so do you. When prevention education is implemented well, the impact can be far-reaching. It's already been shown, even with no funding up to this point. Students begin to build confidence and learn how to recognize boundaries. They understand when something isn't right and that they can talk to a trusted adult. That awareness can literally stop the abuse in its tracks, or it can stop that risk to harm so much sooner. It opens the doors for those conversations within families that might never have happened otherwise. The number one question I get asked is how parents can start these conversations with their kids. This is the perfect way to help parents navigate these discussions and remove any stigma that could be attached to discussing this important topic. Over time, these conversations literally strengthen our communities around us too. The more people that have that language, that understand it's up to the adults in our community to protect the kids and to watch out for them, that begins to be part of our culture rather than a reaction after abuse has already occurred. More upstream efforts are involved when we have these discussions sooner and on a bigger level. And the ripple effects can last for generations. The number consistently shows, the numbers that we see in research show that just one trusted adult can make a measurable difference in a child's life. That trusted adult may be you. You may be the only safe place a child has. It's encouraging that we're not just talking about abuse awareness here. We're building systems that support prevention. And I have no doubt that the prevention we're discussing today will change the lives of countless children across our state, both now and for generations to come in the future. I know that much of the work that you do as educators, as counselors, as mental health professionals, the work you do is often invisible. You may never see the child that was saved from harm or abuse because of you, or the child who was protected because of something they learned or the kindness and concern that you showed. Your efforts matter, even if you don't see the results. But I can promise you, you matter and the work matters that you do. Thank you for being willing to have these conversations and for the crucial role that you play in protecting children. I appreciate the opportunity to join you today and to join with Mindy as we talk about such important topics. And from here, I will send it back over to Mindy.
Thank you so much, Deandra. You can see why I am a fan of hers. Always so powerful and such a great segue into how we can make that important work happen in our schools. So thank you so much. I couldn't thank you enough for being here. I did add some statistics just to reinforce some of the points that Deandra made. In Utah, 1 in 7 children will be sexually abused by age 18. That is a lot of our students. This work is so very, very important. 3.3 million children are being exploited in sex and labor trafficking at any given moment worldwide. 91% of the time, children are sexually abused by someone they know and trust. Deandra shared that with us. And the good news is that education is effective. It is key. Participation in prevention education halves the likelihood of child sexual abuse for students. So So hopefully those points and Deandra's message has reinforced this important topic and why we want to make sure that we include prevention efforts regarding child sexual abuse and human trafficking in our schools. We're going to dig now into the laws that cover those topics. The main one is Utah Code Section 53G-9-207. The takeaways, the big ones from this code that we are going to cover today, is that training is required every 3 years for adults serving youth. Those are all of the people that work in our schools in elementary and secondary, as well as parents and guardians of elementary students. I do see people that get surprised by that one occasionally. We want to make sure that our parents and the adults in students' lives have the skills necessary to recognize and to support students. Instruction is optional, though highly encouraged for elementary students. And we will talk about how we can make sure that that is as easy a process as possible, and maybe we can support some funding to make that happen in your schools. All instructional materials that are used for child sexual abuse and human trafficking must be state board approved, and I will tell you how that happens shortly. I want to start talking about the minimum standards that we do have for our child sexual abuse and human trafficking education in our schools. This is what our organizations, when they submit their materials for approval, make sure that they are aligned to. These are required topics and criteria that must be met. And they are three. There are three of them. You can find them on our prevention website. For our adults serving youth, again, that's the school personnel, parents and guardians, and elementary students. There are separate standards for each of those categories, both in human trafficking and child sexual abuse. All changes to these minimum standards must be approved by the state board. I do occasionally run into people that have some great suggestions. Those all need to be approved by the state board. There were a lot of thought and effort by professionals and experts in this field that went into creating those minimum standards. And we do make sure that all materials are aligned to them. Instructional materials must be submitted for approval, include a rubric that aligns those materials with our minimum standards so we can make sure that we are in alignment and there are not pieces in their materials that oppose some of the criteria in our minimum standards, as well as all of the minimum standards are met. There are way more standards than I listed here, but these are the ones from code that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of. And I do think that it helps to explain, because I do have questions sometimes about how we teach such a sensitive topic to parents as well as school personnel and elementary students. So hopefully this can help clarify the modality for the way we go about doing that. So for adults serving youth, we want to make sure that the trainings cover responding to a disclosure in a supportive and appropriate manner. That's not something that comes naturally to everybody, and we want to make sure that there are instructions on how to respond if a student decides to disclose to their trusted adult at a school. Identifying children who are victims or maybe at risk of becoming victims. A lot of times schools are the front line in identifying victims of child sexual abuse and human trafficking. Teachers see these students every day. They get to know and love them, and they are able to pick up patterns and see when things are a little bit different and notice concerns a lot of times before other people in that student's life. And because of that, we want to make sure that those materials cover mandatory reporting requirements. We want them to feel comfortable reporting, and we want them to know how to do that, as well as appropriate responses and connecting those victims with support services, both at the school and knowing what to do and where to take that student to make sure that they have the emotional support and that we can make this as comfortable a process as possible. For our parents and guardians, we want the trainings to include recognizing the warning signs of a child who is a victim or maybe at risk of becoming a victim. That is very important for our parents to be able to notice if that might be happening, and to engage in effective age-appropriate methods for discussing the topic. Like Deandra said, we do have a lot of questions about how do I talk to my student. I got this question often as a counselor. how do I discuss this really sensitive topic with my student without being weird and without making them uncomfortable and doing it in a way that's age appropriate? So we want our materials to make sure that those are covered in an age appropriate way. And we want resources available for victims and families. We want to make sure
I thought
that
you said that you guys were
okay. We want to make sure that resources are available for the families and victims and they know where to go for support. Now, our elementary student materials are presented in an age-appropriate way. So we want to make sure that we're teaching students that adults are responsible for the safety of children. Children are not in this alone, and we help them to identify their trusted adults, how to recognize uncomfortable inner feelings, how to say no and leave an uncomfortable situation, how to set clear boundaries, the risks of sharing intimate images or personal information, both through social media and our devices. That is something that is increasingly important, and the importance of discussing uncomfortable situations with parents and other trusted adults. We do not want the instructional materials to encourage or invite students to share personal experiences about abuse during the instruction. We do not want to give instruction regarding consent because that is in our Utah code. And we do not include sexually explicit language or depictions. I have included the protective factors. These 5 protective factors pop up in, I believe, all of our webinars because it is so very important and it is the core of what we are doing in prevention. Child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention is no different. When we create a feeling of safety and an environment where students feel comfortable to disclose abuse, we are providing a concrete support in time of need. It is also very important for students to know the knowledge of development. They need to know what is appropriate and is not appropriate for children to be engaged in. We want to make sure that we are building those ever important social connections. They know where to go for support. They can identify the people that make them feel safe so that they can disclose in a comfortable way. And we are building resilience. We are teaching them to self-advocacy skills to stand up for themselves and to advocate for their body safety. And by doing that, we are building cognitive, emotional, and social competence and helping them to create an environment for themselves where they can advocate, they can feel safe, and they can emotionally regulate and all of the things that they need to be successful. So we always want to include these protective factors. Again, they're the heart of all of the prevention work that we do. I do get a lot of questions about parent notification, and so I want to make this super clear. When you are providing elementary student child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention instruction in schools, the parents must be notified in advance of the instruction and of the content of the instruction. We want to be transparent. It's not a secret what we're talking to our students about, and we want our parents to be involved and feel comfortable with what we're teaching their students. We want them to know that if they are uncomfortable, that they have the right to have that student excused from instruction. And the code does say upon written request of a parent, but we want to make sure that we're increasing our relationships with families, we're building that trust, and we want our parents to feel comfortable saying, I really don't want my student to participate. Also, that presents us with an opportunity to explain what we do cover and maybe let them look at it from a different viewpoint. We want the parents to be given an opportunity, they must be given an opportunity to review the instructional materials before the instruction occurs. If they come to you and request to see those materials, we must make those available to them. And it's helpful to have somebody explain and be able to answer their questions at that time. Parents are allowed to be present when the instruction is delivered. We encourage that. All of the organizations that we work with that are on our approved materials list know that and welcome students to come and be a part of those presentations and to see that instruction in action. We will quickly go over what it looks like for organizations that we partner with to have their materials submitted in schools. I do get occasional emails from school with suggestions for materials that they feel would be a good fit, and this is what that looks like. Anybody is welcome to have organizations reach out to me and inquire about how to be a part of this cycle. We have 2 open submission cycles per year, one in the fall and one in the spring. We have one open right now. It closes April 24th. And so there is time if you do have a curriculum that you have noticed that you feel would be a good fit, please give them my contact information and I'm happy to walk them through this process. What it looks like is we do use Midas for them to submit their materials along with that rubric we discussed before that shows their alignment to our minimum standards. We have a review committee made up of DHHS members and USBE members and some survivors and community volunteers that review those materials and determine if they are in alignment with our minimum standards. If they are, if they meet those guidelines, we recommend them for review by our standards and assessment committee. So when that goes before committee, the board members that are on our standards and assessment committee review those materials, sometimes offer suggestions. They determine if they meet our minimum standards. And then if they feel like they do, then they recommend them to full board for approval. It's usually the following month. So sometimes this process does take a few months to complete. And if that board approves those materials, then they are added to our approved child sexual abuse and human trafficking instructional material list. This is updated after every open cycle closes. And so we add those new materials and update that list. You can find that list on our website. And that's always on there. And if you can't find it, please let me know and we'll make sure that you are given that because it does have organization information for all of our approved materials in parent and guardian, adult serving youth, and elementary student materials. If the review committee determined that those organization materials did not meet the minimum standards, then they are notified within 30 days that you did not meet the minimum standards, and then the organization can decide to end the process. They can appeal that decision, or they can update materials to come into compliance and resubmit in our next open enrollment cycle. The same if they don't meet the minimums, the standards and assessment committee, if they determine that there is some work to do with those materials, that same process happens at every step during this. So they do notify the organization and then they can decide what they want to do. We encourage organizations to update materials. Our minimum standards do change from time to time. So there are times where organizations will update to meet our minimum standards and then resubmit, and we welcome them to do so. The list that I was talking about, this approved child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention instructional material list. This is always a mouthful. There are no short titles in this area. But this list is located on the USBE prevention website. It's updated twice per year after each submission cycles. Materials on that list are approved for a 3-year period. So all of the materials are good to go. They do not have to resubmit every year. They have 3 years before they have to resubmit for approval. And they do include a variety of delivery methods. And we want to make sure that when those materials are used in schools, that they are used in accordance with the delivery plan and instructional process under which they were approved. So for instance, if you partner with an organization and they give you access to online teacher lessons that are supposed to be taught in the classroom, you cannot just turn them into a Canvas course and have students participate on their own. We have to use those materials and we have to cover every lesson because we want to make sure that all of the topics that are required to be taught through our minimum standards are covered when these lessons are taught. Deandra talked about the Senate Bill, the Safe Child Project, so I will not go in too much depth here, but it was championed by the Policy Project, who sponsors a lot of school-based bills. This took effect on July 1st, 2024, and it did create our Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Grant Program for $500,000 per year, and I will talk through how to access those funds shortly. And it created a state preferred provider contract for $1 million so that they can provide elementary student education free of cost for LEAs. And it did also help to clarify the age-appropriate instructional material criteria for CSA and HT prevention. Our preferred provider contract has been awarded to Prevent Child Abuse Utah. They are contracted to provide K-6 classrooms at no cost to schools. They conduct a fantastic train the trainer cohort for qualified educators to be a part. They come and they teach them the materials, and then they are able to then conduct those trainings in their own schools. This is the contact information for Emily Sparks, who's the education program administrator. She can help get you started. You can also go to the website. It's very easy to find if you would like to schedule your school. Take into consideration that Prevent Child Abuse was just awarded this grant, and there is a high demand, and they are growing as we speak. So be patient. They are very passionate about making sure they get to as many classrooms as possible as they grow into this new role as the contracted state provider. You are welcome to use an alternative provider, and you can also find funding if you choose to use a provider that is not Prevent Child Abuse Utah. That $500,000 that I talked about will support using another provider from our approved provider list. Also, that trainer of trainers that I just talked about, you could provide stipends to your faculty, for your counselors, your social workers, your school nurses, anybody that would be qualified to teach those child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention lessons in schools could qualify for a stipend for going through that process and teaching those lessons. It is due on May 29th. There have been several due dates throughout this year, but we want to make sure we're using these funds, so we keep extending it to give as many schools as possible the opportunity to access utilizing those funds to provide this instruction. There's a funding deadline of July 15th, so everything that you're spending needs to be spent by that day. It is $500,000 per year, and you do apply through Utah grants. So you'll need to work with your LEA grant, the people who have access to Utah grants, to apply for that. There is a reporting requirement along with that grant. These are things that you will need to keep track of if you are utilizing grant funds. You will need to keep track of dates that the classroom instruction was delivered, how many sessions were provided, and the number of parents that opted out of the training, as well as how many students participated in that training. So those are things that we are trying to keep track of at the state, and we are wanting to make sure that those funds are spent and see how that goes. These are things that those funds can be used for. You can pay for approved instructional materials for K-6 students other than PCAU. So those are provided for free, but you can access any of the other approved materials on that list and use these funds for that. You can pay stipends for educators to pick up trainers to provide those lessons to students. You can pay an approved organization to provide lessons to students directly, and you can pay for printing or other associated costs for providing the elementary student education. Please remember that this is for elementary student trainings only. We have had a lot of questions about if funds could be used for those parent trainings or their staff trainings. And unfortunately, at this time, the grant is only for the elementary student materials. Awarded funds may not be used for food. We can never pay for food, dang it. But we can't pay for food or other incentives for students to participate. We can't provide assemblies for whole schools or grade levels or anything like that. We can't buy equipment, and we cannot pay for a position. We can stipend an already established position, but we cannot pay FTEs to provide the instruction. Okay, I do see a message in the chat on providing clarification if these trainings are required. So I'm going to back up a little bit, and I will show you that. Oh, this is farther than I thought. I apologize. Required training every 3 years for adults working in schools and parents of guardians. That is required every 3 years. Instructional is option for elementary students. Though, again, we highly encourage that. So forgive my scrolling through this. Okay. This is the process for the adult serving youth and the parent guardian trainings. Again, this happens every year and it is required. I could have just gone on to the next slide. Apologize for making you scroll. You're going to look at the approved material list. You're going to use those descriptions. There is a link to all of the websites where you can find more information about each of those trainings on our approved list, and you're going to find the right one and the right training for your needs. You're going to work with your district or your school leadership to confirm those training logistics. You're going to get it planned. You're going to make sure that you understand the modality in which it must happen. And you're going to partner with that desired organization to coordinate that training. Super simple process to make sure that those adult serving youth and parent guardian trainings happen. There is also an option that LEAs may create their own instructional materials and submit them for board approval during an open submission cycle. You're welcome to look through the minimum standards, and if you feel like your district, we do have a district right now that is approved to provide the adult serving youth materials, and you're welcome to do so. They will go through the same process as an organization that submits such materials for approval. All right, this one's a little bit more complicated, but we're going to walk it through and hopefully we can simplify this for you guys. The child sexual abuse and human trafficking process for elementary students is that the materials are chosen from the same list. So you start in the same place, you're looking at the list, you're identifying which program feels like a right fit for your school, and you're going to decide whether you're going to use Prevent Child Abuse Utah or you're going to go with an alternative provider on that list. And if you do decide to go with an alternative provider, you are going to decide, there are different modalities in which these instructions were approved, but the majority of the time, the organization either provides those lessons and comes and presents in the classroom, or gives those lessons and the modality in which they must be taught, or they do have a train the trainer. There are a few organizations that do provide that. And for either of those options, you can use the choice grant. That grant is available in each of those situations. Or you can use the Prevent Child Abuse Utah. Again, the grant can be used if you have education professionals go through the Train the Trainer series with Prevent Child Abuse Utah. But they do provide those classroom lessons for free in schools. And so that is something that we always want to make sure that we let schools know. This doesn't have to be a process where you're applying for a grant, but you always have the option of free instruction for students. Making sure that when these lessons are taught, again, I just want to reiterate that all of the content that was approved has to be provided. You cannot choose between I'm going to provide lessons 1 and 4, or we're only going to cover lesson 3 this year. We have to make sure that all of those lessons are covered because we want to make sure that we're meeting the minimum guidelines, the minimum standards that have been board approved. Okay, that's a whole whirlwind. I want to just check the chat really quickly. Are there any questions about what can and cannot be covered in the grant and what that process looks like before I move on? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I want to give the opportunity though, because this is not something that we're experienced at yet, where we're learning. This is the first year of the grant, and we want to make sure that this is clear for everybody. I also want to let you know that we talked through the 6 different categories in which materials can be submitted. We have the child sexual abuse and human trafficking for adult serving youth, school personnel, and elementary students. And Prevent Child Abuse Utah is the only provider that has materials approved in each category. So if you're looking for consistency and a streamlined approach, that might be an organization that you choose to work with. All right, moving on. There are a few just items to consider when you're preparing to put together elementary student training. You decided, like Deandra, got your heart working. You want to make sure that these students are getting this materials in the schools. So you want to make sure that this is something that you implement on top of all of the other things that you are implementing in your buildings. So I am going to simplify this as much as possible, maybe help you think of things that you want to include in your to-do list. I'm a checklist person. So we're going to start in the same place. We're going to look at that list. We're going to look at the approved provider materials, and you're going to choose a training that feels like the best fit for your school. Paying attention to the method of delivery and the amount of time required. Each training is different and it's unique to the organization who submitted it. So take the time. I really encourage you to click those links in the list and look at the organization information and find out the logistics of that training to make sure that it is doable and that it fits into your building needs. You will reach out to the organization that you choose to work with and coordinate on implementing that material into your curriculum and what you're doing in your schools. You're going to notify your faculty of the date, time, and procedure. I am guilty of this as a counselor. I notified teachers a little bit too late. And sometimes this is something that we need to mentally prepare for. Also, teachers have a lot of required instructional time. We want to make sure that we give them as much notice as possible to be able to realign their day. And we also want our teachers to be present for those lessons. A lot of teachers share this passion and want to make sure that it's not on a day that, like if they're planning a vacation or planning on it, we want to give them as much notice as possible. Also, if we do have teachers that maybe are sick or not in the building, or maybe are uncomfortable with this topic and do not want to be there, maybe there's a history that they would like to avoid being a part of that instruction. We want to make sure that we have a plan for those classes, that maybe we can meet with those teachers outside of classroom time or give them the content so that they can make sure that they have access to the same verbiage and the same information that their students are given, but maybe we can provide them with a substitute in their classroom. Or if we have that classroom where we have a lot of classroom management concerns, maybe we want to add an extra person into that classroom because sometimes students can rise to the occasion, and we want this to be a comfortable training for everybody. We want to make sure that there is enough adult support to make sure that these lessons happen in a organized and efficient and comfortable way for everybody. Don't forget to send home your parent notification. Make sure that as you're planning this, that you put a process in place for parents who have questions. Make sure that you know what to do if you have a student who would like to view the content, that you know how to get that to them, that you provide an avenue for them to get support and ask questions, and make it an easy process for them to opt their student out. Don't try to argue with them. Make sure that the teacher knows what to do if a parent contacts them to opt their student out. Make sure that that's a smooth process, and make sure that you have a plan in place for students who do have their parents call and excuse them from that training, that they have something to do that is not punitive in any way. We want them to have access to a place where they can feel comfortable, whether their parents have allowed them to participate in that or opted them out. You want to make sure that, if possible, that you're clearing your counselor schedules. Counselors and social workers should be available to offer support and, if possible, be present for as many lessons as possible to make sure that that avenue for getting support in your schools is clear, that those relationships are built. And counselors and social workers have special training and they know their students, and they can look and maybe identify some students who may need some extra support and maybe a check-in after these lessons are presented. Please plan to send home resources. We want to reinforce student learning by sending home resources so parents understand how to support these lesson concepts. Even though you're providing parent and guardian lessons for child sexual abuse and human trafficking every 3 years, those aren't always the same parents that might have questions when their students come home with questions. So we want to make sure, again, that we are all on the same team. We are reinforcing students in a safe way and building those relationships so students have a safe place to access help and support. And if there are student concerns that arise during these trainings, it happens frequently, that you want to make sure that with your faculty and staff and with adults working in your building, that you are reviewing the school policy and the state law on mandated reporting requirements and procedures, and providing safe avenues for adults to also access support with that process, and maybe with some of their own concerns and issues that may arise as participating in some of these trainings in our child sexual abuse and human trafficking prevention trainings. All right, we have 10 minutes left. We're going to take a couple of those just to reflect. There was a lot of content covered here in this hour, and I want to give everybody a chance, and I would love some share outs on what you are going to start. I borrowed this from Clarissa. She is always wonderful at ending with purpose. So we want to make sure that you are taking what you've learned from this, that it's relevant to what you're doing. So what are you going to start doing, maybe that you hadn't been doing before as a result of the information that you got today? What maybe were you doing that you recognized needs to stop or that you would like to change? And what are you going to continue doing that you are already amazing at and doing in your buildings? And I would love to hear some of these things from you. I'm going to turn the time over to you guys to share things that you'll start, stop, and continue doing as a result of this information. Feel free to unmute or to share it in the chat. Either one is fine. You guys are going to see my counselor skills. I can sit here and smile for a long time.
Okay, I'll just come off mute. I was going to type it in.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm going to start really looking at the adult serving youth trainings and see which one fits best with our district. I like the idea that like Davis School District made their own and maybe looking at theirs or maybe having my counselors help me create one. I'm going to stop procrastinating and I'm going to continue. We had the state vendor come and work with us and train the trainers for our elementary counselors and a couple of our intermediate who serve sixth grade. And we've had really positive feedback from that. So we're going to continue with that.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. Anybody else?
I was the one who asked about middle schools, and I talked with our health teacher a little bit, but she said they really don't cover a lot about abuse specifically in there, and there's very strict rules about what can be said about sex and all of that. So I think I want to go over next steps would be to go over the health curriculum and really see what's taught in the health class, and then see if that's something we could use this separate curriculum as a counselor to go in and teach in a health class, like go drop in and do a lesson for a day. So I want to just like research that more and see what's being taught, what's allowed, and then how to get permission to go in and teach it outside an extra lesson. So
Thank you so much for sharing. I love how you identified a gap in and found how you can support our students that maybe we don't have rules and legislation for, but still is very important that they access this support. So thank you so much. I really love that.
And I just want to add here, Victoria, that there may be some of the approved providers that have some materials that you could use, so you don't have to write it all from scratch. So you can feel free to reach out to them.
Yes, please do. I'm going to read out of the chat. We have at NUES providing community webinars for their region in April and May, and they are happy to share those dates with others. So that is wonderful. Thank you guys so much. I love community and I love partnerships, and thanks for supporting each other in this wonderful work. Now, I'd like to ask you guys, we have 5 minutes, if you would take some time to share your feedback with us on this training. We want to know if it was relevant. We want to know if there are other topics that you would like us to dig deeper into. We're happy to provide that through prevention. So scan this QR code. I'm going to drop the link in the chat and to make life easy for everyone. And so go ahead, you can click Tanya Albornoz as your trainer, or should they click me on this one. I'm not sure. We usually have them.
Either
Either one
way.
is fine. Share your feedback with us. I always love to know what I can expand on and what you guys would like to hear. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that. Since the link is in the chat, I'm going to go ahead and move to the next screen and share my contact information with you. I really appreciate, I'm pretty new to this work. I keep saying that. It's been about a year and a few months now. So it's getting more familiar, but I am always learning. I love that process of learning, and I would love to support you and learn what your needs are. So that is my contact information. I am always happy to support. I also support trauma-informed practices and parent seminars. So if you have information that you would like to talk through on either of those topics, I'm also happy to help with that.
And thank you once again for joining us today, and join us next month for behavior support basics. Have a wonderful day, everyone.